News Talk 1240.
So, just as promised, on the 5th of November, the 5th of November, we got a bunch of leaks out of the, well, not really out of the anything. We got a bunch of leaks out of what is supposed to be Anonymous. Now, Anonymous, of course, is so loosely organized that it's not even an organization, and it's not really anywhere close to what I would call an organization anyway. People like to tout it like it's the best, biggest thing ever, and I keep hearing people saying, oh, Anonymous can change the world. I kind of doubt it. Anonymous is not nearly as interesting as we may have been led to believe. It's just an organization that's very loosely organized of different hacktivists and spokespeople, I guess. It's not really that great. It just sort of is. People attach themselves to it all the time. We're going to get a little more into the history of it later on. But right now we're going to focus on the 5th of November leaks. The Washington Post has been talking about it a little bit as well. And it is interesting. It's not like it's the most boring story ever. It's just that I'm tired of the whole Anonymous thing because it's been going on for so long, and Anonymous is not a organized entity by any means. It's just people who go under a label for convenience's sake, and it bothers me, I guess. It's just annoying. Well, anyway, Washington Post has a story here about the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. After days of inaccuracies, confusing reports, and false starts, Anonymous's much-hyped Operation KKK has finally released a list of the promised 1,000 names. Actually, not 1,000 names. They've released about 100 or so names and social media accounts, many of which appear to have clear connections to the Ku Klux Klan or other white supremacy groups. The Pastebin document was distributed via Twitter on Thursday afternoon, and it contains hundreds of links to individual Facebook accounts, some of which have already been removed in the days before the promised leak. As the list began to circulate, even more of the linked accounts have begun to vanish as well, which would suggest veracity, but not necessarily. So here's the deal. This is, again, a rather important story if it turns out to be true. And we can't really prove that it is true, so we can't tell if it's a very important story or not, because it's not like we can just ask some high up in the TBI, hey, are you a member of the KKK? And they'll say, well, of course I am. It's not going to work that way. People are not that dumb. At least I like to think they tend to not be that dumb, but hey, you never know. Well, the data dump was one of the most widely hyped operations in the history of Anonymous after the amorphous internet collective promised last week to unmask about 1,000 members of the KKK or their associates. But as is characteristic of the sometimes chaotic and leaderless group, things don't go quite according to plan. An early leak of names, phone numbers, and emails that one hacker said were of those Klan members proved to be substantially inaccurate, threatening to tank the operation before it even began. The operation's official Twitter presence eventually disowned that leak and promised a more carefully researched list on Thursday, which we did sort of get very late in the night or late in the evening on that day, on Thursday. Now, again, it's not really, I don't know how important it is, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. I'm not sure how important this leak actually is because there's not a whole lot of information in it other than just names and phone numbers and email addresses sometimes. But again, what does that really give you? I could compile a list of names and say, this is a list of KKK members, and there's no reason to believe that any more than there is reason to believe this particular leak. I don't go for it right now, personally. I'm not seeing any sort of verification that it is true other than just the hacker saying, I researched it, it's real. That's not really good enough for me. Sorry. I mean, as a journalist, I can't just go with that and say, yeah, I'm gonna say that this is KKK leaks, because I can't tell if it is or not. And there's no way to verify that. It's all allegations at this point. So you can make allegations against anybody, and that's not really going to amount to a hill of beans if you can't prove anything. And this doesn't prove anything. So if you could prove to me that some guy in the TBI, GBI, governor, whatever, was a member of the KKK, then I'd start caring. But if you can't prove it, then that's not really interesting to me. Get me a video saying I'm so-and-so and I'm a member of the KKK, then I start caring. But until then, I can't really be made to. Sorry. I mean, that's just how it is. And it seems way too optimistic to expect that I'm just going to go with it when we see these when we see these different leaks, because that's just way too optimistic of an assumption that media is just going to jump on that, because I've not seen anything about it on TV news anyway. I haven't really seen anything about it in print media except for here on WashingtonPost.com. So it's not really being picked up nearly as much as perhaps these people would like to believe. And you've got to know, media would love something like this. As a member of media, I can tell you we'd love something like this if it turned out to be real, but it hasn't. And at least as far as we know. Plus, we're looking at the South, and in the South, there are a lot of KKK members, although Pennsylvania actually is the highest concentration. It doesn't surprise me, honestly, to see some TBI and GBI names on there, which are in the alleged list of KKK members. It doesn't surprise me to see some people are members of the GBI or TBI or the ABI, I think is a thing, or all the different agencies, different state agencies. That really doesn't surprise me too much. And it's not groundbreaking, honestly. It's really not groundbreaking at all, this information which came out. So I hate to be a damper, I hate to be a wet blanket here, but honestly, I'm not seeing it as a huge deal as much as we were being led to believe it might have been. So we always have to I like to have some pessimism anyway. When we're looking at big leaks like this, I like to say, well, it's probably not going to be anything, and go on with that assumption until it proves itself to be something. And if it is something, then we'll start to talk about it more in depth. But right now, until someone comes out and says, hey, you can't leak my name like that, I'm a member of the KKK, then I start to care. And then it starts to be interesting. But this is sort of exemplary of it exemplifies some of the problems, perhaps, that we have with internet journalism and internet activism. Now, I've got no problem with internet activism or internet journalism. I think it's great. It really is. It's an amazing thing that we can now have great journalistic pieces put out by people who don't actually work for any newspaper or don't work for any radio station or TV news station or any institution like those. It's nice that we can have people put out really good info on a blog. That's great. But it's also dangerous. We have to, as readers, as consumers of this media, we also have to be our own investigative journalists a little bit and verify some of these claims, which any good journalist would want you to do anyway. Any good investigative journalist would give you sources and cite sources and say, don't believe me, believe this source or that source or what have you. That's good journalism. And I'm not really seeing that coming out of this. This is just the hacker saying, look, this is KKK names. I got them. Here they are. That doesn't really mean a whole lot to me. As much as I want there to be a leak of KKK member names, whatever, I mean, it doesn't really mean a whole lot to me, honestly. This particular leak doesn't mean a whole lot to me. If you can make me care, then I'll start to be interested. But this doesn't make me care yet. And this could turn out to be something good, right? I'm not saying that this is not a leak of KKK names, because I don't know. It's allegations. I can't prove anything. But if it turns out to be something good, cool. If not, hey, at least we erred on the side of caution. And I think that's the better stance to take. Here in the modern day, though, we do have a lot of really good bits of good citizen journalism, as they like to call it, on YouTube. And we see some of it on Facebook. Sometimes Twitter is a great source for information from people on the ground. All sorts of great stuff like that. And I'm really happy about it. I love it when information like that gets out from people who don't work for any sort of institution, so we can at least have a little bit of trust behind whatever source he's got. We can understand that this guy actually is on the ground and is taking photos of what's happening. And yeah, he'll have his own bias, he or she, but I can get that information from another person on the ground posting on Twitter too. So I can have two different sources all at the same time. Great stuff. It used to be, things have changed a little bit. It used to be back in the old days, a newspaper was like a badge of honor almost, where a newspaper, your work being published by a newspaper meant the newspaper believed in what you published, right? You read that newspaper because you knew the editors in that newspaper wouldn't put out anything that wasn't true. And that's not really the case anymore as much, I don't think. I think things have changed a little bit. We tend to err more on the side of opinion pieces than actual real hard-hitting stories. Now, that's not the case all the time, and I know that. And I'm not trying to bash any particular paper, but I am saying that we tend to move towards opinion pieces a lot more nowadays than perhaps we used to. And it doesn't seem like something being published in the paper means that it's inherently true. And perhaps that was always the case. But it's interesting too, because now we tend to be the editors of our own news. We compile our own sort of newspapers. Google News is a great way to do that, where you can sort of curate different sources and say, I want news from here, 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 and I don't want this guy or that guy, but I do like this guy's writing. and you can sort of compile your own newspaper. And I think that's the point, really, of Google News. There's Flipboard, which is another great app for doing that. And their Feedly is another great one for Android. I'm not sure if it's on iPhone or not, but there are different sources for getting your news all over the place. I would say diversify your news portfolio. Yeah, listen to Hot News Talk Radio, but there's great other sources too. And ultimately, we should be where you go. But hey, we gather our news from all sorts of other places too. So Hot News Talk Radio is a great source for news, and you can always get us here at hotnewstalkradio.com. Make sure you bookmark that. Go to Facebook and then search for Hot News Talk Radio, where you can see us, see all of our great Facebook posts there on, well, Facebook. Also on Twitter, go to Twitter and then search for Hot News Talk Radio. Hot News Talk Radio is also on the TuneIn Radio app for your smartphone. Just go to TuneIn and then search for Hot News Talk Radio, and then you can, well, listen to us streaming live there on the TuneIn Radio app. The weather has been really bizarre today because I do the weather forecasting here at Hot News Talk Radio too, among many other things. I've got about 40 hats that I put on. And when I looked at the weather forecast for today, I saw rain, thunderstorms possible for tomorrow. And I thought, oh, wow, cool. Because I like that sort of thing. But it was then when I come to work today and it's a great, it's a really nice day. That's not so great, actually, because it makes it so that my forecast was not really incorrect, but it means that now I have to deal with another great day, and I don't like good days. I really hate nice, clear weather, actually, and that's kind of the weird thing about me. I prefer weather that is really dreary. I like it to be cold, and I like to be able to wear like sweaters and things, and I can't do that if it's 80 degrees out. And unfortunately, we here at Hot News Talk Radio, we keep our offices nice and frigid, so I can wear sweaters all day. So I'm cool with it. But man, this whole deal with the KKK, though, I'm still wallowing in that. The resulting list is unverified. It appears mixed on that front, according to the Washington Post. It is, in part, a documentation of several white supremacist networks on Facebook, which Anonymous says it compiled via human intelligence. That included consulting with experts and public records, allegedly, of course, and covert online chats with some of the individuals included on that list, saying, you never know who you're talking to on the internet, Anonymous says. But some are very apparent limitation. There are some very apparent limitations. Some of the names listed are clearly marked as aliases. Organizers suspect that others on the list might be fake names as well. Vice magazine also spotted one error in the list. The inclusion of Ben Garrison, a libertarian cartoonist who told the Washington Post in a late Thursday email that he is not in any way a white supremacist, but has long been the subject of a racist meme that he said has ruined my online reputation as well as my commercial art business. Now, I feel very bad for Ben Garrison because I've seen Ben Garrison cartoons being edited to be very, very racist indeed. And I really feel bad for him, honestly, because Ben Garrison has been sort of associated with the whole white supremacist thing on the internet. And it's sad because Ben Garrison seems like a nice guy, seems like a cool guy, and he makes political cartoons, and he's a professional artist, and he tends to be a libertarian lean. And I think his work is really good personally, but it is sad that his work also gets hijacked to make it into some less than appropriate, perhaps. I'm not sure what the best way to be would be to say what his edited art looks like. Basically, people go into Photoshop or GIMP and edit it and make it very, very racist indeed. And Ben Garrison, I do not believe Ben Garrison is racist at all, but rather than looking at like the more traditional sort of docs that the operation was hyped to be, the list is almost entirely comprised of Facebook accounts. There were some Google Plus profiles and Twitter accounts in the mix too, but the list also has a couple of emails, at least two of which were already publicly available, and another that is listed for an entry marked as deceased, so is thus rather useless. Anonymous doesn't always speak with one voice, and one Anonymous associated account began tweeting screenshots of phone numbers, addresses, and at least one partial social security number of some listed individuals within minutes of the list going online. The account also gave a peek into some of the trickier methods used by the operation's volunteers, including, it appears, using clans' greetings to get their targets to talk to them. Now, here's the problem that I have with this whole thing. Well, one of many problems that I have with this whole thing. Now, let's be clear on this one. Let me pull an Obama. Let me be clear. I do not like the KKK, right? I think that racial discrimination is a despicable thing. And we can all pretty much agree on that. I'm rather sure we can all agree on that one, right? I don't need to keep repeating that to make myself sound good. We can all pretty much agree on that. But that being the case, if we are a country which values freedom of speech and views and all sorts of other things, wouldn't we then come to the conclusion that it is also your right to be kind of a bad guy? It's also your right to be racist, even, right? It's kind of your right to say and to post inflammatory, very racist, very inappropriate things on the internet, right? As much as I don't like them, and I don't, that doesn't mean you can't say it. And that's always the ultimate argument that a lot of statist people like to push. And I'm not bashing them, but I'm saying this is the argument that a lot of people like to use is you can't say that, because that's the wrong thing to say. You shouldn't say that. Well, perhaps there are things that you shouldn't say to people, right? I mean, there's a way to conduct yourself, and that's not the way to conduct yourself is to be racially prejudiced. But on the other hand, you do kind of have a right to be racially prejudiced, right? I mean, I don't like it, again, but you kind of have that right, which is weird because, again, Anonymous is supposed to be representing sort of the pinnacle of defense of rights on the internet, and yet Anonymous doesn't seem to very much like it when people have dissenting views. And that doesn't really make any sense to me, or at least dissenting views that dissent from the way they dissent, right? Whatever. Kind of odd. I think the whole Anonymous thing is kind of funny, though, because if you read into Guy Fawkes, he was a monarchist, actually. He was not an anarchist. He was a monarchist who wanted Catholic rule. That's why he was going to blow up Parliament. A lot of people don't know that. The gunpowder plot, the 5th of November, that gets referenced in V for Vendetta, which is a really good graphic novel. It's a decent movie. It's a really good graphic novel, and it's designed to evoke a lot of emotion, and it's designed to be open, perhaps, to different people of different political views. Whereas I may take one lesson away from V for Vendetta, you're probably going to take another lesson away from V for Vendetta, and that's how it's designed. That's how it's supposed to be, and that's fine. It's well written. But again, the real Guy Fawkes, the guy who you see the Anonymous mask, the white face with the twirly mustache and the eyes that look funny and the sort of smiling rosy cheeks, the Guy Fawkes masks. When you look at those, that's the face of Guy Fawkes. Now, Guy Fawkes was, again, a Catholic nationalist. He was a monarchist, actually, and his plot was to blow up Parliament, British Parliament. Now, his motive was to de-seat, to take out the Parliament, which was largely Protestant, in order to install Catholic rule. Because, again, Guy Fawkes was Catholic, and he wanted Catholic rule. Now, being Catholic, I've got no problem. Wanting Catholic rule, hey, fine. But blowing up a bunch of people to attain that, there's a word for that, and it's called murder. And it's also, terrorism. So obviously, Guy Fawkes is not really a guy to be looked up to, depending on who you look up to, I guess, because there are people who look up to Gavrilo Princip, the guy who shot Franz Ferdinand and ultimately started World War I. Now, in Princip's defense, he was younger than I am now, and I'm 20. He was 19 when he shot Franz Ferdinand, and he was thrown in jail for a long time. And I think if he had known the consequences of shooting Franz Ferdinand, he would not have done it. Yet still, he committed an act of terror, and this really kicked off the terrorist century, and this century too, the 1900s, was really kicked off by Gavrilo Princip shooting Franz Ferdinand, which led to World War I, which led to World War II, which led to Korea, which led to the Cold War, which led to everything we have now. So obviously, we can say that there are lots of negative things you could say about Gavrilo Princip. But in Serbia, his native Serbia, a lot of people actually hail him as a hero, as a freedom fighter. And Guy Fawkes is sort of the same way. He's a very polarizing character. Now, whereas Gavrilo Princip obviously succeeded in his plot to shoot the Archduke, after many failed attempts, he actually succeeded in shooting the Archduke Franz Ferdinand in his rickety automobile with a handgun. Actually, it was a Colt hammerless handgun, by the way. It was a Browning hammerless FN Herschel made in Switzerland. Or Belgium, I should say. Very good guns. But he'll still hold up today, I would say. And he shot Franz Ferdinand with it, and that led to the World War I, World War II, all the subsequent wars after that, you could argue. But people in Serbia, some of them hail him as a hero, and some people hail Guy Fawkes as a hero. The difference, though, is that people who hail Princip as a hero know what he did and agree with it. The people who hail Guy Fawkes as a hero probably just watched V for Vendetta, haven't actually read the graphic novel, don't actually know that there was a real Guy Fawkes and what he did. And so that leads to some interesting situations where you have you have quite a few actually people wearing Guy Fawkes masks saying that they're anarchists, and Guy Fawkes was a monarchist Catholic. That's the exact opposite of anarchist. Anarchy means no ruler. Monarchy means one ruler, one singular ruler to rule everything in this particular land. So obviously, Guy Fawkes was not an anarchist by any means, especially if he was Catholic. And I mean no offense when I say this, but Catholics tend to have quite a few leadership roles in Catholic society. Now, that's not a bad thing. If you consent to that, hey, fine. But I'm not a fan of that idea. I don't really follow along with it. But we'll talk more about this in a few minutes here on Hot News Talk Radio and hotnewstalkradio.com as well. Get us on the TuneIn Radio app for your smartphone.
This is a mob mode. This is the mob mode. What kind of fool do you think I am? You think I know nothing of
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Sky Aerial Services uses advanced drone technology to give you a better perspective and depth of your property and project. We offer aerial photography and video for your business, farm, home, or advertising campaigns, as well as editing services to complete the experience. Call us at 423-521-0284 and see how we can help you tell your story about your business, property, or project. We work with real estate professionals, both commercial and residential, developers, engineer inspectors, surveyors, ad agencies, auto and boat dealers, mapping services, insurance inspectors, corporate marketing, charity events, weddings, and photographers. Our consultation is free. Call 423-521-0284. That's 423-521-0284, or visit our website, skyaerialservices.com. Sky Aerial Services. The sky is our limit.
Here you are, working to keep your customers happy and to manage your cash flow. IRS problems are the last thing you need, but here they are, flapping about you like vultures. Get help from Eric Pelton and his team of accountants at E.J. Pelton Company. Audits, letters, proposed return changes, 1099s, penalty threats. Pelton Tax Resolution Services brings peace of mind and helps you keep more of what you've earned. EJPelton.com. Offices on Brainerd Road and in Soddy Daisy, just north of the Bilo. That's E.J. Pelton. Call 622-3156. Think ahead, 622-3156.
We've got a table here at Delia's in Soddy Daisy, ready to delight in a plate of authentic Mexican food. Delia's spreads a rich selection, loaded nachos, crazy chicken, homemade tamales, maybe the enchiladas with beef, chicken, pork, quesadillas. Every dish beautifully pictured on the menu to help us decide. Join us for lunch or dinner. We're at Delia's in Soddy Daisy on Dayton Pike near the Thrasher Light. Here's dinner. Delia's uses the freshest ingredients, cooked to perfection. Nachos, homemade. Delia's open every day except the Lord's Day. For lunch and dinner, treat yourself to Delia's genuine Mexican food. In Soddy, call 521-7145. That's 521-7145.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Costa, host of the Costa Report, every Sunday at 9 a.m. Mark your calendars right now, because my guest this week is none other than one of the leading GOP presidential contenders, neurosurgeon Dr. Ben Carson. Don't miss a revealing conversation with candidate Ben Carson this Sunday at 9 a.m. in the Costa Report, right here on AM 1240, Hot News Talk Radio.
This is America Now with Meghan McCain.
President Obama makes Jimmy Carter look like Napoleon Bonaparte. We have a president that leads from behind, and when America doesn't lead, bad things happen.
Meghan McCain, weekdays at 7 p.m.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Hi, I'm David Tulis, inviting you to make the move with me 9 to 11 a.m. weekdays here at AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. The David Tulis Show, featuring Nooganomics.com for Chattanooga and beyond. 9 to 11 a.m. weekdays.
Hot News Talk 1240.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
Hot News Talk 1240.
Oh, history, how I love thee. This is Digital Drive here on Hot News Talk Radio AM 1240, and we're always here at
This is a Fox News alert. I'm Lillian Wu. Fox News just confirming that the president will reject the Keystone XL pipeline.
That Canada to Texas pipeline that's been in the works for many years and has been the source of a bitter political battle, not just in Washington, but around the country. Republicans citing job creation, energy independence, Democrats citing a lot of environmental concerns with the transportation of this type of oil.
Fox's Jared Halpern. Pipeline's backers are expected to challenge his decision in court, and the GOP-controlled Congress may try to override the president, though those efforts have previously failed. More allegations coming out about the Illinois cop who authorities say committed suicide as he was being investigated for embezzlement.
Multiple people tell us that Glenowicz's son was also temporarily in an arranged marriage to boost military benefits with a woman who was his father's lover.
Fox's Jeff Manasso, Fox News. We report, you decide.
Like I was saying, I'm a big fan of history. I love reading into it. I think it's one of the more important things to learn. History is extremely important. And kids tend to not be taught a whole lot. And certainly I have a lot to learn. You know, we have a few thousand years of human history to look into. So yeah, but no, history is one of the more important things that you can learn. And you can learn a lot about how things are today by reading into history. And you can even learn how the future is potentially going to pan out if you look at history. Because history repeats itself. And it always does. It always will. And it's funny, too, how we like to ignore that, or we say we are so different from what we had before that just couldn't happen. There couldn't be another world war of any sort. We're beyond that. And it's funny because we are in the perfect time for one. That's kind of the weird thing. Honestly, we are in the perfect time for a world war right now. If you look at history, and I'm not saying that this should happen or that it could happen, but I'm saying, well, it can happen, but I'm not saying that it should happen or it's going to immediately or anything like that. But if you look at how history is lining up right now, it's actually very similar to how it was in the early 1900s, which is funny because we are right now in 2015, exactly 100 years separate from when World War I was raging. So I've been really interested in World War I recently. It's one of my, I don't want to say my favorite conflict because it's a very bloody, nasty thing. But I'm very much a pacifist, and that's kind of funny because I really like reading about war. I'm fascinated by it. And that's, again, kind of weird because of how pacifist I am. I think war is a disgusting, despicable thing. But I'm really fascinated by it at the same time because there is that, I guess that glory factor there's something to be said for it. I think maybe it's a carnal thing in all of us where we want to go out and we want to destroy things. Maybe that's it. I don't know. But there's something just fascinating about reading about these different wars. And plus, you can learn a lot about international geographic history and all sorts of other things, international politics from reading about different wars, especially international conflicts like World War I was, which was a very big world war. In fact, it was potentially one of the bloodiest wars of all time, and it had the best militaries of all time involved in it. The German military, when it began, was the best military ever. And it took several other armies to beat it. Now, the German military during World War I was the best at the beginning. It was the best. Could not have been beaten, except it was because of bad strategy, poor leadership in some parts, lots of different factors. Basically, fate demanded that the Germans lose. Simple as that. That's how I would put it anyway. I know a lot of people don't believe in fate. I believe in providence. I believe in predestination. And so it demanded that Germany lose. Thus, Germany lost. There is a plan, and that was part of it. And I'm cool with that. You know, had Germany won World War I, this would be a very different world. There'd be a larger Germany, certainly. Poland might not be independent right now. I don't know. The Russians might not be the Russians right now. There might not have been a Soviet Union for any sort of time at all. It would have been an interesting conflict. And yeah, but if you look at history and you look at World War I, the circumstances which led up to it, the world was begging for one spark that would lead to war. And we don't really have that right now. We don't have that spark. We have little international conflicts of sorts, but major powers are at peace, generally speaking. I could travel to Russia and come back to the U.S. with no problems. I could travel to China and come back to the U.S. with no problems. I can go to Hong Kong. I can go to India. I can go to the U.K. I can go to Iran even. You can travel to Iran. You can now travel to Cuba. So there's almost world peace, almost. There's still pretty big conflicts going on, but it's actually, we're having more peace now than we have in a long time, which is kind of odd to think about considering all the bloodshed going on around the world, but we're actually better off. And that's, again, sort of an odd thing to think about, but looking at history and looking at things that people went through back then, we are actually much better off now. And it makes me worried, too, that there might be people in power saying that we need another war. And that's another thing that I'm rather worried about, is someone in some office saying, we need a war right now. We could use one. And I'm worried about that prospect. I'm worried that someone will decide we need to have a war. And that, again, worries me, because someone in some office could agree that that would be something that's necessary. And I'm kind of worried about it, honestly. But I don't know. Is that going to happen? Could it happen? Sure, it could happen. Will it happen? I doubt it, but it could. That's all it needs, really, is someone to decide, yeah, we could use another war. After all, if you think about the pros, I mean, if you're thinking from a standpoint of the world powers, when they say, well, look at the good things that happened during World War I, where all these different things changed, and look at all the, the great things which happened then. You can see that, technological advancements occurred. Things changed to a great degree. Things became so much better after World War I. We had all these technological advancements. Look at World War II. We had Velcro, for heaven's sake, after World War II. I mean, think about it. Moving forward from there, we had the space race after that. The Cold War led to all these different technological innovations. And I'm worried that someone in some office is going to look at that and be enticed by it and say, we could use another war to help the economy pick up off the ground. Who knows? And that's worrying to me, to say the least. I don't want that to happen. I don't like war. War is a despicable, terrible thing, and it should not happen. And yet it probably will. And that's frightening, because there are young people now who have no experience with war. You have a lot of Iraq and Afghanistan vets, but that's not the majority of us. We don't really have a generation which went off to war in my day. That hasn't happened, and I hope it doesn't. But it very well could. And if you look at, say, experience in terms of generals, we don't really have experienced generals who are involved in major conflicts right now. Yeah, Gulf War, but not sure if that counts as a major conflict. It was big, but I don't know if it counts as a major conflict with army movements and all sorts of grand strategy. It really focused on maybe two countries. You had Iraq and you had Kuwait and Saudi Arabia too, but really it was just a culmination of just a few countries, and that's a small geographic area compared to the grand scale of World War. So it's frightening to think that we may have that someday soon, maybe in my lifetime. And I hope not, but it could happen someday soon. I am worried, though, about the public perception. I'm worried about what the public would do if there was the announcement that we're going to war with X world power here. And again, it seems so unlikely now, too. And that's sort of the optimistic side of it. And that's what I was wanting to get to, is the optimistic side, where I'm looking at it now and I'm saying the public response to the announcement of war would be so negative that it almost would make it not worth it. Because think about people in my generation, think about people my age. We don't want to go to war, because that means us having to go off and die. We don't want to do that. That's probably, you'd have so much dissent. You'd have people moving to Canada. You'd have people forming their own countries in some offshore mining facility. We'd rather do that than go off and fight for some government cause. At least I hope so. So if you look at it that way, that adds a positive spin to it. But also think about it this way, too. We kind of need each other on the global scale. The U.S., the way we're set up right now, we need China. China, the way it's set up right now, needs the United States. And again, we all need each other because we're so globalized, we're so interconnected that we kind of need each other now. And that leads to a lesser chance of war. And that's a good thing, honestly. In the big grand scheme of things, that's actually kind of a good thing, where it's less likely now that we could go off to war because of some idiot deciding to shoot some president or prime minister or cabinet member or whatever. Heaven forbid that happen. Because again, I don't want that to happen. But if it did, it's unlikely that we would go to war because of it. Now, there are your exceptions. You have North Korea, right? Where it seems like anyone's itching an excuse to liberate, quote unquote, North Korea. And there's any excuse to do something about Iran, any excuse at all to do something about Iran. But again, perhaps we need Iran in some regards because it needs to be the boogeyman. If it ceases to be, if we crush Iran, then there's no boogeyman anymore. We need to find a new one. So it's Iran right now. And that's another topic that I wanted to get into, actually, is the idea of the ICBM, the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, which is a grand feat of technology. I don't even understand how it works in a lot of different ways. I know it's a rocket, but I also know that it can go into space. In fact, it's designed to, the intercontinental part. But it's such an amazing feat of technology. Look at the Soyuz rockets. Look at the ones which we Americans have made. Amazing feats of technology. They're great. They're so nice. But they are instruments of war. They're designed to kill millions of people. And I don't want millions of people to die. And that's one of the things where nuclear weapons are the one exception almost where I say that perhaps there should be some control, because I'm a big proponent for you owning a gun. If you yourself, personally, you want to go off and buy an AR-15, you should be able to. And if I want to go and buy a handgun, I should be able to, but I can't because I'm too young. I'm not 21 yet. I can't even buy a drink, I can't buy a gun, a handgun, and I can't buy a drink either. Now, those two should never mix, keep in mind, but I can't do those things because of some arbitrary number that's been attached to my age. And it's not really arbitrary. I'm 20, I get it, but it seems so ridiculous that we attach labels. Like, am I really going to be that much more mature when I'm 21 in a few months compared to how I am now at 20? I kind of doubt it. And really, am I that much more mature now than I was at 18? Actually, yeah, very much more. But compared to, 21 to 20, am I that much different? And 17, 18, was I that much different? Not really. So it doesn't make a whole lot of difference there. But nonetheless, you should be able to buy whatever firearm you choose. Small arms, whatever. You should be able to buy whatever firearm you choose. Even machine guns. I'm fine with that. Because the controllability of a machine gun is really not conducive to any sort of civilian shooting. Really, the machine gun part of the machine gun is more for support, not for accurate shooting anyway. So, but whatever. I digress. But nuclear weapons are the one exception to that, where really only a government could afford to purchase nuclear weapons anyway. It seems only a government would want to use a nuclear weapon anyway. Think about a corporation. What good would it do a corporation to kill millions of people? That's millions of customers you've now murdered. So you have no cause to do that. Governments do, though, because there's war. There's different petty reasons that someone in government might want to bomb 1 million people and kill them. Or 2 million, 3 million, however much the Tsar Bomba would kill. All sorts of different reasons why you might want to do this. So it's a tactical reason. If you look at the 1960s military history, 70s, we were almost going to nuclear bomb Vietnam. We came close. We were going to use nuclear bombs on Moscow, for heaven's sake, after World War II. We came close. Think of all the innocents who would die. We almost used nuclear bombs again on North Korea during the war, and China too. But we didn't, and it's a good thing we didn't, but we came close because that decision could have been made. Someone could have said, yeah, let's do it, and it would have happened. And that's the frightening thing. That power should not exist in any one man's hands or any group of people. No committee should have that power. That simply shouldn't happen. Now, again, technologically, nuclear bombs are fascinating things, and technologically, ICBMs are fascinating things. And they're very interesting to read into and to look at, and the destructive power is enticing. It's intoxicating, but they should never be used, right? Now, if we look at ICBMs, which is like the big threat, I want to throw some truth into this. The big threat that we're all worried about is the ICBM, the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile. We're all worried that if Iran gets its hands on an ICBM, it'll launch it straight towards the U.S. and blow us all up, blow us straight to hell or heaven because we're perfect. Problem with that is an ICBM launch is easily detected nowadays. It's the 21st century. If Iran came out with an ICBM, it would be using 20th century old Soviet tech, undoubtedly. The Iranians do not have the facility to build a good ICBM, present-day ICBM. In fact, we barely even have cause to use ICBMs because they're so easily shot down. That's the thing. ICBMs are not really meant for well, they're meant for first strikes, but they're also easily shot down nowadays because we have facilities to do that. I mean, they're huge. If you look at the size of an ICBM, it's huge. It's the size of a submarine launching at you. Of course, you're going to notice that. Radar systems are so good nowadays. It can map the velocity and footprint and say that's an ICBM, and they shoot it down. They intercept it. It's no more, and we're all safe. Hooray. That's what would happen. Either that or it detonates somewhere in the atmosphere, and we get a little bit irradiated, but none the worse for wear. And overall, no destructive power to take out New York City. So an ICBM is really not what I'm worried about. Okay, so let's talk about the suitcase nuke then, because that's what everyone is worried about then, is the suitcase nuke. Oh, another thing is everyone's worried that Iran's going to use an ICBM to hit Israel. That would be so dumb. That would be the dumbest thing that Iran could do, is bomb Israel. Because again, Iran has not a whole lot of reason to do that on the one hand, because that would lead to the annihilation of the Persian people. Essentially, if it was proven that Iran blew Israel off the map, then Iran would get steamrolled by every major power. So that's unlikely, or at least the U.S. That's unlikely. Plus, there's, again, it would lead to PR problems. Iran doesn't want to bomb Israel. I mean, come on, let's not kid ourselves here. We can talk about ideology all day, but the strategic reason to bomb Israel is next to nil. So it's just not there. And whatever ideology you might want to plant on them, it still doesn't really work. So that's highly unlikely to happen. That's another boogeyman, is, ooh, what about Israel? Boogeyman. A major scale attack on Israel is very unlikely by Iran, because Iran knows it would get steamrolled by any of the major powers. Israel would say, help us, we need help, and we would steamroll the Iranians. It's unlikely that would ever happen. Okay, so an ICBM launched at Israel anyway would be geographically stupid, because Israel's right there. I mean, seriously, it's right there. Are you missing the intercontinental part of the ICBM? They're on the same continent. They're both in Asia. They're both in the Middle East. They would just launch the ICBM, and it would go way up high and then come straight back down and give the Israelis tons of time to shoot it down. ICBMs are very unlikely. Okay, what about a suitcase nuke? Well, at international border crossings, there are facilities in place to detect radiation levels. And even at truck stops, actually, if you notice that trucks have to go through the weight thing and they go through the scanners and whatever, those actually detect radiation. So any spike in radiation that's out of the normal would immediately get picked up, and probably your bomb components would be found. Here's the other thing about suitcase nukes. They're not actually really possible. I mean, they are to some degree, but not to the degree that we like to think of it fitting in an actual suitcase. You can have large gym bag nuclear bombs, right? But again, the only government known to have manufactured one is the U.S. government, and it spent several $1 million on doing that with tons of great scientists, which a terrorist cell does not have. So a suitcase nuke is not really something that I'm worried about. Not even a dirty bomb, because getting heavy water is hard. I mean, I've seen the process that you have to go through to get heavy water. It's hard. So getting radioactive materials to spray out over everyone, again, is kind of hard. Where are you going to get this radioactive waste which you wish to use? Where are you going to get the uranium, the plutonium, whatever? Where are you going to get these materials? It's, at that point, you may as well just use conventional weapons. And again, to get all the materials you would need for an effective conventional weapon, it's not easy. Have you tried buying tons and tons of, say, fertilizer? I mean, 1995 happened. The OKC bombing happened. So it's pretty hard actually to make a fertilizer bomb nowadays. And even so, you realize the material that was required to build that. Huge gallon drum barrels of explosives had to be put in the parking garage beneath the facility. I mean, this is a huge operation, and it's unlikely that could be pulled off. That's why we have terrorist attacks, which will hijack different objects and fly them into things, because that's actually easier to do than to manufacture real bombs. So the threat of a suitcase nuke and the threat of a dirty bomb and the threat of even a conventional bombing, I don't see as a real threat, honestly. I'm not too worried about it. The tech is too advanced, I would say. But then again, if you look at 9/11, the tech was technically too advanced for that to happen too, and yet it did. So flukes can happen. Whether they're willed or not, whatever your view on that is, flukes can happen. And that certainly was a fluke. 9/11 was one of the biggest flukes I've ever seen. If you read into the technology and all the preventative measures that were there to prevent 9/11 from happening, because it was in view, something like that happening. We know government foresaw something like this happening. If you look at all the safeguards, look at all the fail-safes, technologically speaking, this should not have happened. And nowadays, this would be an even bigger PR disaster for the U.S. government if something even bigger happened. That would be the biggest PR disaster ever. And the uprising would be immense. So when we talk about global war, when we talk about nuclear bombings, really only world powers can pull off a nuclear bombing, I would say. And really only a world power could pull off a wide-scale disaster like a massive bombing of some city, some major metropolitan area. So the big world governments are really what we have to worry about. But the big world governments don't really have a vested interest in blowing everybody up because, again, that's lost customers. The Chinese need the Americans to sell things to, right? So if the Chinese kill all the Americans, there's not really anyone to sell things to. So what's the point? It's much more profitable, actually, in some regards, to not go to war than it is to go to war. That's why we've had this protracted period of peace. Not protracted, but we've had this extended period of peace. Pardon, wrong word. We've had this extended period of peace now on a global scale. Now, yeah, we've had confrontations in the Middle East, and those are not good, and those are terrible, actually. But if you look at the global scale in terms of world wars, the biggest conflict that we've seen in a long time was Vietnam, and that was a long time ago, actually. That was a long time ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago in some cases. It's an old war now. 2 generations ago. So obviously it's been a while, and perhaps we're primed for another one, or perhaps we're primed to continue on as status quo. I guess my main point is we don't know. That's the point. We don't know. So maybe it's not worth our time to keep worrying about it. And I'm not saying don't worry ever, and I'm not saying don't ponder these things, because obviously that'd be hypocritical, because I spend a lot of time on it myself. But I'm saying that sitting around worrying about the end of the world is probably not worth our time, because if the end of the world is going to happen, we'll probably all die anyway, right? I mean, if there was a nuclear bombing, Atlanta is a pretty big target. Nashville, Knoxville, Chattanooga even is a pretty big target. We would all die anyway, so probably not worth worrying about. If you want to be safe from a nuclear bombing, go out to Kansas, where there's no target at all. Go out to, actually better yet, go to North Dakota, because nobody cares about North Dakota enough to bomb it. Now, I think North Dakota is a beautiful state. I want to live there someday. But I wouldn't nuclear bomb North Dakota, and I don't think anyone else would either. So that's the place to go if you don't want to be nuked. This is Digital Drive here on Hot News Talk Radio, and I say, don't worry, be happy, maybe. Pacifism perhaps will win in the end. And even so, there is conscientious objection. We could always say no. That's the power of that word, no. No has so much power that we don't even know how much power no has. If we all said no, then so many things would simply not happen, not have happened like they have today. We all stood up and said, no, I'm not going to let you. That's not going to happen. You're not going to tell me what to do. Then so many things could have been averted. So many bad situations that we have. What if during the healthcare situation that we're in now, citizens just stood up and said, no, I'm not going to pay for this. Forget it. Instead, we sat down and said, well, I guess it's the law, so we better pay for it. I guess if it's what's on the books, we got to pay for it. So obviously the whole idea of American bravery perhaps goes out the window if that's how we treat things. If we treat tyranny with just saying, well, I guess it's okay then if it's the law, instead of simply saying no, and I don't even mean violently, just say no. I'm not going to do that. Sorry, not going to happen. Those simple phrases can save your hide sometimes. Just say no, because it's okay to say no. You can reject people. You can reject offers. You can reject propositions. It's okay. Say no. If I asked you, hey, you want to go see a movie sometime, just say no. It's all right. You know, if I say, some cop says, hey, you mind stepping out of your car? You say, well, no, maybe not. Now, in Tennessee, you do have to step out of your car, but perhaps, you know, some different regard. You don't mind if I search your car, do you? No. Actually, you can't search my car. I do mind if you search my car. See? Simple words. No, you can't search my car. Not going to happen. And that's okay, because you're well within your rights to do so. The power of the word no is one of those things that's actually the big conspiracy theory, actually, is that the power of the people is a huge conspiracy theory. Actually, when you think about it, because if we all conspired to say no to different requests, we would have all the power in the world. After all, the power of the purse ultimately belongs to us. We keep talking about Congress and the power of the purse, but what if Congress suddenly didn't have its money flow anymore? That's power of the purse. It lies with the populace, not with governments, not with Congress even. We are our own rulers, not Congress. Clutch with Keon Rose is coming up next year on Hot News Talk Radio AM 1240 and hotnewstalkradio.com.
This is a mob mode. This is the mob mode.